back to the GamecockScoop.com podcast, the official podcast of GamecockScoop.com on Rivals. I'm Caleb, joined by Alan. We're going to talk a lot of basketball today. I heard that there's been some news since we last were on here. If you're listening on YouTube or Spotify or Apple or wherever you might listen to this podcast, make sure you subscribe so you see when our weekly episodes post. If you're watching us live, feel free to comment wherever you're at, and I think we will see it, and we can answer any questions or just say hello. So last week we were on here. We were talking about the incredible men's basketball win at home versus Kentucky. But I think we were still kind of throwing some water on the fire and being like, nice win. You rode the home crowd, whatever. Then the men decided to go on the road to Tennessee and also knock off another top 5 team within the span of a week on a Tuesday night. And now, I don't know. I whenever I put out the story on Twitter that day, I said maybe we should stop being shocked every time they shock the world or whatever. I'm looking at we can get into this deeper here in a second, but I'm looking at their net rating. They have the most or the best win percentage of quad one wins in the SEC right now. They are near the top of the standings. They have some very winnable games over the next week or so before it gets tough again. Should we adjust our expectations at this point, I guess?
Yeah, I think that was my main takeaway coming out of Knoxville Tuesday. Is like you start actually looking at the whole picture here, and it's like, okay, 18-3 overall, 6-2 in the league. I think we both were in agreement before the SEC schedule started that 9 league wins would get you in the tournament. Well, you're 2/3 of the way there now, and you still got 10 games left. You got your 2 resume wins. You got Kentucky and Tennessee on the board. Like I said, you still have 10 league games left, and I think most of those, almost all of those, you feel like are winnable. You're probably not going to go 10-0, but you don't feel like any game's out of reach after what you did against Kentucky and Tennessee. I think at this point it would be an active disappointment if you don't make the tournament. And then from there, it's about how high can you push up the seed lines? Could you maybe get a double bye on the SEC tournament, finish top 4 in the league? I think you start adjusting to those things, right?
Yeah, we're definitely making plans like they're going to make the tournament at this point, which is something I wasn't expecting about a month ago. So definitely didn't feel like a sure thing about a month ago. Like you said, not necessarily a sure thing. You could collapse on the back half and dissipate all this goodwill you've built, but feels pretty good right now. Looking at the immediate schedule, you have a rematch tomorrow at Georgia. That's a game we were talking right before this that we felt like South Carolina probably should have won at home, but had their worst free throw shooting night of the year that night. Ended up losing in the final minutes. And then you have very winnable games against Ole Miss and Vanderbilt before you have to go to a very tough Auburn team. And really the end of February into March, the final stretch of games is pretty tough. But you get those 3 wins, you're at 9, right?
You're right there, yeah. And I even think I think tomorrow is a very interesting game. It's how does a team respond after a big win thing, which you kind of saw against Missouri last week, but Missouri is 0-7 in the league. It's not really the same thing as going on the road after a big win to Georgia, a team that beat you, a team that's, I think Georgia's 4-3 in the league right now, that they're going to be game on their home court. That's a very interesting test tomorrow, but you're right. You look at next week, you look at Ole Miss in your building, Vanderbilt for sure in your building. You feel you should win those 2 games. And even if you did slip up tomorrow and you won those 2 at home, you're up to 8. And at that point, you'd still have 8 games left after that, 7 games left after that. I still think, I don't know what the bracketology looks like right now, but like if you're making a bracket now, 7 seed, 6 seeds, like you're not even on a bubble right now. You're like pushing up the seed lines a little bit, I think.
Yeah, I think if you're
see what Lenardi had today.
If you're looking at SEC teams that are definitely in, South Carolina has to be in that conversation, at least as things stand right now. There was something else I was going to say that I forgot what it was.
The quad 1 wins? Oh, you mentioned that. Yeah.
Yeah, the quad 1 wins. I think the thing, if you're a South Carolina fan, you're kind of always pessimistic is the best word, cynical a little bit. If you're trying to make an argument for why this team probably won't collapse, I think it's the defense. This is something a little bit about last week when Calipari called them the best defensive team in the SEC. And then we saw that, go on the road to Tennessee and hold one of the countries, not just the league, but one of the country's most explosive offense, well under their average, which they've done to every team they've played all year. I don't know. I don't see a drop off coming there. Just the style that they play, it feels like, unless you go completely cold like you did in the second half against Alabama, it's hard to not see you kind of competing in every game down the rest of the schedule. And if that's the case, you probably should win at least half of them at a minimum.
Yeah, Lamont Paris uses the word repeatable a lot. He talks about it after Kentucky, after Tennessee, that said they didn't do it at Alabama. Things that are repeatable, things that you can do in a game-to-game basis, even when the other stuff, where you're playing, who you're playing, how your opponent's shooting, how you're shooting, all that stuff, maybe that changes game to game. Your defense can say the same every game if you follow the principles, do things in the system, all that stuff. And we talked about it on Tuesday, but I think they got it right. Like, Dalton Connect's going to do what he does. That's an incredible scorer. He might win a National Player of the Year. I mean, he had 31. He did what he did. But the rest of Tennessee's offense, like, they pretty much had him under wraps most of the game. They kind of just, I don't want to say let Connect do his thing. They were still, guarding him pretty heavily, obviously. But they made a very conscious effort to just not let anybody else get going. And they pretty much wire to wire did that.
I was very impressed by Connect, who pretty much single-handedly kept Tennessee in it. If they don't have him, South Carolina probably wins that one with a similar score to the Kentucky score. But Connect was just making guarded shots.
I mean, he had a circus shot on that last trip down that cut it to 2. That was ridiculous.
Right, yeah. But it did kind of feel like South Carolina was very in control that entire game. And we speak about their identity. It seems like, for the most part, every game that they've played, they make the other team play to their pace. And that can be very, very frustrating for some of these upper echelon teams, like Tennessee, like Kentucky, who are used to going fast, used to being able to kind of score points in transition. I saw someone, I think it was on Reddit or something, but describe it as the way South Carolina plays is like when you're in the fast lane and someone in front of you is going 60, and you just like can't get around them because there's traffic on the other side, and you start getting more and more fervent and making more and more like crazy sort of moves, but you're still stuck behind them. I think that's a perfect metaphor for the way that this defense is playing right now. And I don't see any signs of it letting up. Obviously, I still think you're very, let's call it thin. There's a couple people that if they got injured or something, it would be kind of over, but that's the case for almost every basketball
we didn't even talk about that. Miles Studi, after missing 2 weeks, came back. We didn't know if he was going to play before the game because he warmed up against Missouri last Saturday, which we didn't even mention that game. They did beat Missouri in between Kentucky and Tennessee. He warmed up for that game, did not play at all, did the exact same warm-up. He had the same compression sleeve on his shoulder, and he did play, and he hit 3 threes. He hit 4 free throws to ice the game in the last minute. He defended pretty well. That's a big – I think people might have maybe forgotten about him a little bit because they obviously beat Kentucky without him, but that's a big piece for this team back.
I think he also, before he got injured, had a couple of games back-to-back where he kind of struggled shooting. But, he clearly showed what he brings to the table on the road at Tennessee, and in some ways was kind of the difference in that game. So came back at a good time. I believe Paris, after the game, was kind of talking about coming back in the right way and not making not making such a big deal of trying to like make a huge impact that you like overshoot it. And he kind of threaded that needle perfectly, I thought.
Yeah, Lamont was talking after the game. Basically, he's seen a lot of players get injured, and their first game back, they jack up 20 shots because they want to hit all 20 of them and let everyone know that, hey, you guys missed me, I'm back. And Miles didn't do that. He took his shots well. He got in good. He looked like Miles. He looked like who he was before he got hurt. And if you want to read some quotes from him, Talon Cooper, and BJ Mack, we got them off the podium, like in the tunnel at Thompson Bowling. If you're subscribed to Gamecock Scoop, you go back a couple days. We heard from all three of those guys about the win. And Miles was funny. He had some good stuff. He was talking about some of the trash talk and his relationship with Tennessee from his Vanderbilt days and all that stuff. He's a funny guy.
Let's talk a little bit more about, I guess, just where they stand right now and what they need to do down the stretch. So right now, like I said, they're number 41 in the net, which seems low, but that's a lot due to the weak non-conference schedule. I think things will work out just fine, but just for reference, Tennessee's number 5, Alabama's number 7, Auburn's number 8, Kentucky's 25, Florida 36, and Mississippi State 37. So all ranked ahead of South Carolina in the net right now. The good news is you're already 3-1 against that group, and then you still have games against Auburn, a rematch,
and a return game against Tennessee,
game against Florida, and you end the season against Mississippi State. So still some big opportunities for quad one wins. Of course, net gets kind of weird because as you beat those teams, they go
down the list.
But I still think kind of keep winning. Everything's going to work out fine. Maybe you get screwed a little bit on seeding at the end of the day based on your non-conference schedule. But I don't know. At this point, does it really matter that much? If you're a 5 seed or a 7 seed or whatever, it's just get in and let the chips fall where they may. If you're South Carolina,
I kind of think that's where it is too. I think the SEC thing is interesting too. You're heading into halfway point. Saturday is the halfway point of the league schedule. You are 1 game behind Alabama right now for the conference title, which I can't believe I'm saying, but you're there. Are you going to catch them? Are you going to be able to hold them off? I don't know, but talk about like the SEC tournament and trying to maybe improve your resume there, get some more, neutral court quad one wins there. Well, the top 4 get double byes at the quarterfinals in the SEC tournament, and you're right now in second or tied for second, I think. So I think last year it took like 11 wins to get to 4th in the SEC, maybe 12. I don't remember the standings exactly, but if you can get to that number, I think you feel pretty good about your chances to give yourself more big games in Nashville too.
Yeah, I mean, again, next 3 are all very winnable. You got Georgia, Ole Miss, Vanderbilt. You're saying they need 5 or 6 wins down the stretch.
I'm looking up now what the 4th place team in the SEC had last year, but I think that's what it was.
Yeah. So those 3 pretty winnable. You go on the road to Auburn. I mean, you can't really count. It's going to be very tough. I certainly wouldn't put it down as a win, but you also can't really count South Carolina out at this point, I feel like. Of any of them. LSU comes to town. You go to Ole Miss. You go to Texas A&M. Florida comes to town. Tennessee has their return trip, and then you go to Mississippi State. The March schedule in particular is a pretty brutal stretch. Florida, Tennessee, Mississippi State back to back to back. But I don't know. Based on the way that they're playing right now, do you see 5 wins there?
Yeah.
I know there's some people in our work Slack group chat that feel like 7 wins is even a possibility. That it'd be hard for me to project that right now, but if you get 7 wins, you're definitely sitting in a very good spot.
Yeah, so it was last year for a double bye in the SEC tournament. I know it's different every year. You can't count on that translating, but last year 11 wins was the magic number for a bye, so that would be 5-5 or a double bye, excuse me. That would be 5-5 in the last 10. I think if you get to 5-5, you definitely feel like you're a tournament team for sure. You'd have 23 wins overall at that point. And I think you're probably in that pushing top 4 of the SEC. You do now have too a tiebreaker over Kentucky, and I don't know how it will work with Tennessee if you lost them at home, like how that 1-1 would go. But right now, this exact moment, you have a tiebreaker over Tennessee too, and you have a chance to get one over Auburn when you go there.
It certainly feels like you're in one of the best positions that I can remember at this point of the season for South Carolina men's basketball. Even the 16-17 season, it felt like you made like a late push. I mean, you started strong, but then had a lull in the middle and then made a late push. There's been I can't think of a time, maybe when I was a kid and like Dave Odom was here or something, that you were sitting in this good of a position at the end of January.
Yeah, we didn't even mention it yet, but guys, they're going to be ranked on Monday. I think that will still happen even if they did lose in Athens tomorrow. I know there was a lot of people frustrated about that this week. I saw Michi Johnson got on Twitter, kind of like called it ridiculous or whatever. They were the first team out, like most others receiving votes this week. I'm pretty sure when that new AP poll drops at 1 p.m. on Monday, South Carolina is going to be in it.
Yeah, I mean, you'd like to think so. No, I mean, at this point, their record and the way that they're playing, honestly, they look like a top 15 sort of.
Yeah, I don't know if they're going to get that high, but
no, probably not, just because of the way the preseason rankings play out. But just eye test wise, that's what it looks like to me. To some degree, I think it might be a blessing in disguise, though, that they have been disrespected.
Yeah,
up to this point, because it does seem like the team itself is kind of feeding on that disrespect and has a little bit of a chip on their shoulder. It'll be interesting to see once they start getting the accolades, which are definitely rolling in from the national media now that they've won 2 top 5 matchups within a week. If they can, manage that and keep the same edge to them.
Yeah, I think that's the question. And even like I said, even tomorrow, like it's one thing to respond from an upset win on your home floor against one of the worst teams in the league. And even that game, they were down in the second half. But it's tomorrow you're taking it back on the road against a pretty good team that's already beat you once. I'm interested to see how tomorrow looks.
We will have full coverage on GamecockScoop.com of that game. You're going to be there in person, and we'll have a live thread and come hang out, talk to us about that. Let's talk about the women. The undefeated, coming off of one of their toughest wins probably their toughest win of the season at LSU last week on Thursday. That happened right after we did our podcast last week. South Carolina pulls off a 76-70 win at LSU, a game that they trailed for the majority of.
Yeah, pretty much the whole way.
I don't know if you have the exact minutes, but I think it was like 36.
33 out of 40, yeah.
Okay, there it is. So, yeah, a really impressive, gut check sort of win. You got a little bit of help down the stretch because Angel Reese got into foul trouble, but also you kind of caused that foul trouble.
Yeah, you did.
So, did a good job of continually pushing inside, and eventually it worked out and fouled her out. And then once she was out of the way, it did kind of feel like the game took on a different tone. But yeah, you were there. What were your takeaways?
First of all, I can't believe that was 8 days ago now. That feels like 8 months ago. First of all, unbelievable environment, unbelievable game. I think Don Staley called that like basketball utopia. That's just what you want a basketball game to look like. Everything about that was incredible. I think the main takeaway from that game is just they found a way to win. And I think that's what you have to do in March, what you have to do if you're trying to play into April. They were down 12 early. They were on the ropes for most of that game, like you said. You talking about Angel Reese fouling out. You fouled her out. Raven Johnson stole an inbounds play, hustled all the way down the court, drew a foul on her on a drive. That was her 5th. You talk about hitting some shots late. Bree Hall had a pretty rough 3.5 quarters. She got open late. She's wiggled loose a couple times, hit 2 big threes. You turned the game around on the glass. Cardoso, and I think Kitts, for that matter, too, played really well down low in that game. I think you're seeing kind of that you can cause – it's kind of like – I don't know if you've ever seen like the old show Watchmen, like in the prison, but it's like, I'm not locked in here with you. You're locked in here with me. Like LSU, they got LSU's best shot. They got a record crowd there. LSU played really well, and LSU was up for most of that game, but it's still South Carolina. It's still this team. You would never pick them to lose or not find a way to pull it out, I think is kind of the takeaway. Like, just super impressive. And then you follow that up again with another 90-point performance against Vanderbilt on Sunday. And then last night you have your worst shooting half of the year. You shoot 28% in the first half at Auburn, and you still win the game by 22.
Well, yeah, that's kind of how most of the SEC schedule has gone. But yeah, it was kind of nice, I guess. I remember texting you in the first quarter of the LSU game, and I said, well, they got punched in the mouth, and now we see how they respond. Because even in some of the other earlier close wins, I'm thinking of Utah They still kind of had control through
Yeah,
most of
they
the
did not.
game.
That's a good point. They did not have control for most of that game in Baton Rouge.
Yeah, still found a way to gut it out. It did feel like, you know, a sort of NCAA tournament environment,
Yeah.
and I think that'll serve you well once you get into those environments again later in the season. But you got another pretty big one coming up. What is that, next week?
Next Sunday, UConn.
UConn coming to town. I don't know, like what we kind of have talked all year about, like they're probably not going to go undefeated, but where do you see the slip up, I guess,
Kind
in
of
the back half of the schedule?
I will say, I don't know if we talked about it on the show, but I've talked about it on like the website if you're subscribed, and on Twitter for sure. The Brazilian national team's Olympic qualifiers are next weekend. And we don't know if Camila Cardoso is going yet, but it sure sounds like she is. And if that happens, she would not be available for UConn, which, I mean, great for her. Like, I feel like it'd be very hard to turn down a chance to get to the Olympics for a regular season game, even UConn. But this team might have to figure out how to win. We talk about finding ways to win. They might have to figure out how to win without Cardoso next week, without their 6'7" player against a quality opponent. She'd miss 2 games, but the other one's against Missouri, which I think they'd be okay. But they might have to find another way to win, simulate a Camilla injury, for lack of a better term. Like, what could you do without her, or simulate a foul trouble game for her and just not have her? I'm interested in that. But as for your question, there's 9 regular season games left. You get, I think 6 of them are at home. I don't want to say I think they're going to go undefeated again in the regular season, but at this point, it's if they clear the UConn hurdle in 9 days, it's kind of hard to think otherwise.
Yeah, and for what it's worth, this UConn team is maybe one of the weaker ones over the last 20 years.
They've already got, I think, 4 losses.
Yeah, I was looking back at their schedule. They lost to NC State. A lot now. Granted, a lot of their losses were in November, so they lost to NC State, UCLA, and Texas all before December 3rd. Yep. And since then, they only have one other loss, which was their most recent game against Notre Dame, where Notre Dame did kind of handle them there.
Yeah.
So it'll be interesting. Obviously, it's never one that you can automatically pencil in a win, and especially if you're missing that interior presence with Cardoso. But I mean, if I'm a sports book right now, I'm obviously still going to give South Carolina the nod.
Yeah, and you mentioned interior presence. If you guys, if you missed the game last night, Chloe Kitts did not travel to Auburn. She's sick, or we were told at least. So you get Ashlyn Watkins making her first career start and immediately going for 14 and 15 with 5 blocks. Had a career night last night in her first start. She talked to us post-game in the tunnel. If you're subscribed, I got all those quotes on the forum too. Her and Malaysia Fulwiley talked to us. Just saying that, like, I asked her, like, I'll give you a little sneak peek. I asked Watkins, what's different this year than last year? What's allowed you to basically become a starter? She's playing starter minutes now. She did start a game. She said confidence. She feels better about herself. She feels more comfortable. She looked like someone who belongs in the starting lineup. And, if let's say you don't have Cardoso next week for UConn, I think you found another post player who can start, even though it's maybe not one who's 6'7".
Yeah, I mean, I think that's kind of been the story. You're just so deep. And that's one of the kind of enduring stories from this year is some people that we saw as sort of role players over the last couple of years have really stepped up to that starting role and made a big impact. And you have to think people like Watkins, people like Fulwiley, who are playing a little bit of a role right now, have that in them if they needed to. So,
home
home
against Ole Miss Sunday. Obviously, have coverage of that. Sneaky tough Ole Miss team. They're second in the SEC right now, 6-2 in the league. And then home against Missouri on Thursday, and then obviously home against UConn next Sunday, which we'll have live coverage of.
If we want to talk football just for a minute, the special teams coordinator role was pretty quickly filled. So Joe DeCamillis's contract was finalized earlier this week, Monday.
It was Monday, yeah.
It's a guy with a lot of NFL experience, couple of Super Bowl rings, actually. One with Denver, one with LA.
The Rams.
Yeah. We'll see how it works out from a recruiting standpoint, but you have to think that some recruits will be pretty impressed with his background and everything.
Yeah.
And I think from just a on the field coaching standpoint, you got one of the best replacements for Limbo that you probably could have.
Yeah, I think that's kind of about where I put it. It was very weird. We talked to Shane Beamer at halftime of the men's game Saturday, and that was after the news had broken, but before it had been finalized. So like Beamer kind of had to I think it was once someone asked him about if he wants NFL experience on staff, and he had to go well, hypothetically, if I were to hire a longtime NFL coordinator on my staff, it was kind of a weird gray area for a press conference, but going off Shane saying he knew it was going to be DeCamillis, yeah, I think having an NFL guy in that spot helps for sure. I think what a lot of people miss about special teams coordinating, and understandably, especially with Lembo and kind of all the highlight stuff, the trick plays, the great punts, all that stuff, a lot of it is roster management. A lot of it is fringe management. It's knowing this guy's got this trait that might be good on a hands team or a kick coverage or as a gunner or anything like that. I think you have a good understanding of the fringes of a roster. And I think if you've been doing it your whole life in the NFL, you definitely do. And I think that might be more important than ever in college football, just in the portal era when you're going to be losing 10, 20 guys every year, pretty much no matter what you do, that having a guy who understands fringes and how to maybe manage those guys and pull skill sets out, I think is really important. I thought Lembo did a good job of that, and I have no reason to think Joe DeCamillis won't either.
Yeah, I think also along those same lines, just the extensive experience that he's had. I know he got a associate or assistant head coach title. You're just bringing in a veteran presence for a fairly young staff across some other places on the board, including your head coach. So it's just good to kind of have someone that's been around the game for that long, I think, as a stabilizing personality in the coach's room. Other football updates from that little brief scrum that you had with Beamer. The newcomers of the team, both freshmen and transfers, were introduced at the halftime of the Missouri game last week. And Rocket Sanders had a sling on his arm.
Yep.
Cam Pringle was on a scooter. It sounds like both those guys are expected back by late spring, early summer. But obviously, puts them a little bit behind the eight ball to not be able to go through spring ball, although Rocket Sanders has played SEC football. Maybe hurts Pringle a little bit more.
That's kind of what I was going to say, too, is I would, obviously you don't want to push anybody, but I would really, really, really not push it with Rocket, the guy who's played in the SEC, who's dominated in the SEC, let's face it. If Rocket Sanders misses spring ball, he misses spring ball, I kind of think. The Pringle one's a little bit more concerning, I think, just because that's I don't know if he's going to start week one, but that's a guy you wanted in your offensive line too deep for sure right off the bat, who has no college football experience. And we don't know what the nature of the injury is exactly, but it sounds like it is going to keep him out of spring ball at least to start. I don't want to say that's concerning, but it definitely doesn't help. It doesn't help him either if he's going to fall behind, Franks or Thompson in that pecking order early.
Yeah, for those of you that are trying to get familiar with all of the new names and faces and what the depth chart, I guess, is going to look like for the 2024 season, on GamecockScoop.com, Perry McCarty is starting to break down each position group. I believe this morning he started with quarterback. So you can check that out as we head towards spring. Spring practice opens up on March 19th, I believe. And then the spring game mid-April.
April 20th, yeah.
April 20th. I'm sure, cool.
None of the college kids will enjoy that.
Yeah. That was the thought. So I guess 420 is on a Saturday this year. All right.
It's funny, actually. I know that's not why they did it, obviously, but Shane said they're starting spring ball a week later than last year because they got back from spring. They had spring break academically last year, and the kids got back from that, and they started spring ball that Tuesday. He just said he didn't like the energy the first week of spring ball. I don't know if everybody was still, hungover from spring break or whatever, but he said they're going to put a buffer week in there this year. They're going to have spring break a week off, or a week for weights and stuff, and then they're going to start spring ball that following week, which I thought was interesting.
Yeah, so that's good. Starting to look ahead at the schedule a little bit. Obviously, I'll do my way too early looks at them as we get closer to summer. it's going to be tough. I don't know. I don't have a ton to say about football yet. We're right in the middle of two very exciting basketball seasons. Baseball is right around the corner.
2 weeks from today, yep.
Kicked off, in 2 weeks. So we'll have some preseason looks at changes on the baseball roster. Yep. I know that you've been to some practices and stuff that they've been doing lately. So it's kind of crazy that that's happening. But yeah, this stretch coming up from mid-February to mid-March is definitely the busiest time of the year.
Or the end of March, now that these teams are both playing so well. Who's to say?
That's true. Yeah, so plenty of great content on GamecockScoop.com. If you're not into other sports outside of football, it's probably time to get into those sports because like you said, the basketball teams are both doing very well. Baseball team is ranked in the top 25 in most preseason polls, has a good chance of potentially making it to Omaha. Obviously, they made it to a super regional last year and have a lot of those key pieces back. So really exciting time to be a subscriber on GamecockScoop.com. We will be back next week with the podcast to talk more about basketball and everything that's gone on. And until next time, we'll see you later.